Hello, Friends Talking Nerdy podcast. This is Christopher Lazarick, the voice behind the intro song to Friends Talking Nerdy. Tim and the Reverend asked me if I would just send a short little message, just remembering what it was like 5 years ago to record the Friends Talking Nerdy theme song. And when Tim asked me to do it, he only had the name. So I thought, what do I think is the best kind of nerdy stuff? So I started with anime kind of intro drums, and then I added cinematic strings on it, and then I put in some synthesizer noises, and I wrote a little jingle. If your friends are nerdy and you are nerdy too. And that's how it came to be. Put a bunch of auto-tune on it, and there we go. Happy 5 years, everybody.
You're listening to the Friends Talking Nerdy Podcast Network.
Friends Talking Nerdy.
Masculine men do not care about a woman's opinion.
I know you don't care about a woman's opinion, but what about anatomy? Oh, that just popped right out there. I'd say I'm sorry, but I'm clearly not.
If your friends are nerdy and you are nerdy too, I want to talk to you. Friends Talking Nerdy.
Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Tim Jasma bringing you another episode of Friends Talking Nerdy. Thank you for joining us. Joining me all the way in Portland, Maine, we have Your Holiness, the Reverend Tracy. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, Tim. I recently binged an entire new show. So I thought, I could give a little shout out to it. It's not every day that a new show gets my attention in that way, and I'm already dying for season 3. But the Mr. Reverend and I just watched all of Only Murders in the Building, which, it's got an interesting cast to it, including Selena Gomez. Which it's so funny. There's actually an episode where they all start singing, and she's like the only one who doesn't get her voice kind of showcased. So I actually really appreciated that. There are some weird little guest happenings that happen. Like in the first season, there's Sting, and in the second season, there's Amy Schumer, which I'm not a fan of her. I know she's gotten some shit recently on some TikTok stuff. But I think they play it well, though, because it's just a gag. Like, it's people renting out the penthouse. So it's famous people who come in. They're maybe only in 1 or 2 episodes. So in a weird way, it kind of worked as a silly gag. But yeah, it keeps me guessing. I often can't figure out who done it, which is different for me because I've kind of got that troubleshooty brain that normally figures out who it is and why. Unless it's just is like in hindsight, it doesn't make sense sometimes. Like people will try to be, but when you unpack it, it doesn't make sense. This is not the case with this show, though. Like normally the way they do the reveal, it's totally surprising, but it still kind of makes sense. So if you haven't checked out Only Murders in the Building, I would recommend it. First 2 seasons are up in entirety. And then they're going to come out with a third one. It looks like it's already been renewed. And that was through Hulu, by the way.
Yeah, and it's with Steve Martin and Martin Short. They're the male lead, Selena Gomez, the female lead in the show. I've enjoyed Steve Martin over the years, but I haven't always enjoyed his work. But the key to really understanding whether it's something that you're going to enjoy or not is to see his involvement in it. If he's just an actor, you may get some laughs, but not so much. But like this show, if he's a part of the creative process, it goes there's a lot more to it because he's one hell of a writer, one hell of an actor, and funny as hell, of course.
Oh, yes. And by the way, him and Martin Short are totally making fun of themselves, which are characters that I also really appreciate. Like Steve Martin keeps trying to offer his autograph to people, and it's like nobody fucking cares who he is. Like even to this one little moment where so he's like, oh, take a picture. And he assumed they wanted a selfie with him, and instead they hand them their phone so that they could have him take a picture of them. So I don't know. There's a lot of really awesome comedic moments in there too. And it's got that mystery element, and it kind of keeps you guessing all the way till the end. And then in season 3, Paul Rudd apparently is going to be on the cast for a minute, and that got announced like, hey, there's a Marvel person. So I don't know how involved he's going to be. He did get introduced at the end of season 2, not to do any spoilers, just that, it's like, holy shit, there's Paul Rudd. So, I don't know how involved he's going to be in season 3, like if he's just going to be kind of that gimmick person that shows up or whatever. But either way, I think it's worth checking it out if you're looking for a new show to binge.
Nice.
What about you? How's your week?
Me? Well, kind of a quiet week. Have the place to myself here, so it's just a lot of either jumping between reading or blowing stuff up on Grand Theft Auto. So that's been fun. One thing I do want to throw out there at the start of the show here, we had our first voice message from Christopher Lazarick, the gentleman who created the Friends Talking Nerdy theme song. I was hoping to get that voice message for last week's episode, but with timing being what it is, it's on this week's episode. And I don't think I said it last week, but I'll say it right here. I mean, that theme song made our show sound a lot more professional than what it was. And I love that, because it's like, I want a show that deserves that theme song, and that's one reason why, I love coming back each and every week. So if he's listening, Christopher Lazarick, thank you very much. Secondly, little follow-up based on a topic we had a couple of weeks ago.
Oh my, this is great.
I had an interesting conversation with a woman on OkCupid. I took the Reverend's advice and, didn't totally delete everything, ended up getting a match and started having a conversation. And like I do, I will bring up my interest, including, hey, I have a podcast. And I brought up the fact that we had a recent episode about toxic dating, which if you go back in the show's history, you will read it there. And she asked me, what were some of the things that you talked about? What were some of the toxic dating things that annoy you? And like the first thing that came to mind was the whole idea of going Dutch on a date, the expectation that men should be the only one paying. And that's the first one that came to mind. And if anybody has listened to that episode, you will know that I was not like, oh my God, this is the worst thing that women do to men.
No, but it is funny. So how did that go, Tim?
Ooh, it didn't go well. Basically, she seems to believe that men should pay for dates because women might get pregnant or get a UTI and might have to bear the cost of a copay. She admitted that I wasn't wrong based on what I talked about, but since women could potentially face medical expenses related to potential sex, men should pay for the entire day. And one thing she included here, and I'm not including her name, I'm not that much of an asshole, but I do think that this is worth calling out here. She said, so anyway, you're not wrong that the expectation is fucked, but it's such a small thing compared to what we're dealing with, even if we're lucky. And wow, what a fucked up attitude to have. Really?
Right. Like, it was kind of interesting. So, Tim and I are friends in real life. And so I actually got to see the conversation. And at first I couldn't even get through some of it without laughing, very honestly, just because I was very jarred at the opinion of that because you might get pregnant or you might get a UTI and therefore incur the cost of a copay, that's why men should pay for a date. Like, that was kind of what I took from that. And to me, I feel like that's kind of fucked up. Like, I do understand that women are more likely to get UTIs. She is not incorrect there. However, when you actually research the body and how to prevent some of those things, because that was something that I did find that, happened from time to time, but you could do little things. Like, I think we could get over being embarrassed to talk about this. So all the vaginaed folks out there, if you're, entertaining partners or anything like that, go pee after. It actually kind of reduces the likelihood of both of those things, pregnancy and UTIs. So, and it's not to blame her for not knowing that bit of knowledge, but it was kind of funny that, like, again, this is me taking the conversation, not actually directly talking to this person, but it was hard not to take it as all men should pay for my dates always, because eventually I might spin that roulette wheel and end up needing to pay like $70 in co-pays or for an abortion. And as somebody who has had like different partners throughout my life and dated, I mean, I know accidental pregnancies happen, and this is not to invalidate those, but that doesn't seem to be a common every vaginaed person experience of having a whoopsie pregnancy from dates. So, I mean, I have had a condom break on a date, and I totally went the next day, and, you know, he knew it broke, so he offered to go 50-50 on the morning after pill, and we took care of that. But, you know, other than that, like, I use condoms anyway, even if they've been vasectomied, which, by the way, should you just be allowed to bring that invoice on dates then and maybe get a discount? Like, maybe you can only pay for their drinks since you've had the big V, and, you know, that just now is not as much of an expense risk that they might incur by going on a date with you.
Yeah, the next time I go on a date, I'll bring my accountant Irving with me, and we'll see.
You could just have like an itemized bill set afterwards. That would be great.
Yeah, it's just what struck me more than anything was just the whole idea of, because something worse could happen to me, theoretically, your feelings don't matter. So, you know, of course, when someone like that comes along, what did I do? I proposed marriage. We're No, I did not do that. No, I unmatched. I did not respond to this person. I'm only bringing this up right here because of how ridiculous it was. Now, to your point, she brought up very valid things that could happen to women. I am not denying that she is she's not incorrect on bringing that up, but it was just like what I said compared to what she said just didn't fucking match, and it blew my head. And it was like, I am so glad I'm in a point in my life, I guess, to where I'm not that desperate to have somebody in my life, you know?
Right. And it's like, it also goes to the whole topic it was also meant as to bring up that it would take that expectation off of women to feel obligated, or the person who's not paying, right? Because that power dynamic can go in either direction. Statistically, it tends to be men that are expected to pay for dates. And it can take away that pressure, right? Of feeling like you owe tit for tat at all. Mm-hmm. So that was the other part of that conversation. And then the other thing was that we didn't make up those points. Tim and I very much seem to try to stick to commenting on social stuff. So this was comments made on an article who listed several toxic dating behaviors and attitudes, and that was what we were responding to. So it was kind of funny to me that it wasn't brought up out of nowhere, out of just something that rattled around in your brain. We pulled that from a list. So I don't know. It's good luck to you, as she said, and welcome to her TED Talk. Good luck to you as well, person, in dating, and hopefully you don't get too many UTIs.
Hopefully. And yeah, just good luck. And if you are actually listening to this, please just take the moment to think about what you said. I'm not knocking you as a human being, but your mindset is not healthy. Please get some help. Anyway, before we dive into our response from last week's question, let's talk about Fearlandia for a minute.
Yeah, so we are still accepting applications. I am getting it worked out with my team on the floor, my minions who can actually do interviews right away. Building is also happening. And let me tell you, if you want a foot in the door with any haunted house, sign up to be on the build team. That will immediately earn you some gravy brownie points with who's likely going to be the owners, who also have a say in who's there. And also it gets a feel for what you're creating. It makes you a master of the space. So yes, we are still accepting applications. Feel free to go to the Fearlandia website. You can also look us up on Facebook, and we'll probably include the link as we tend to this time of year to help me in my casting direction endeavors.
And as it's been a long time since I have been involved in theater, but I have been, and I know how important like the backstage roles are. They're 9 times out of 10, they're more important than who you ultimately cast. You know, if you don't have if you don't have a good makeup person, a good set designer or something like that, you could have the best acting in the world, but it will fall flat. So getting a foot in the door and the backstage side of things for any type of creative endeavor like this, if you have any sort of competence, you're going to be working for a long time.
Yes, and we are actively looking for another makeup artist on our team. If you go and fill out the application, I did put it in there for you to upload your work if that is something that you're interested in doing.
Nice. Now, let's talk about our response from last week's episode. Last week, we talked about the student loan crisis. And as we are aware now, President Biden has come out with a plan that if it does see fruition, we'll see people with Pell Grants receive $20,000 in loan forgiveness. People without Pell Grants would receive $10,000. And then there were some other changes as well. I believe they lowered like the interest rate in terms of what people could pay, which will definitely be a big help going forward. But we saw a number of politicians kind of start weeping like crazy on the Republican side about how this is just throwing away money, and like Ted Cruz talking about, what are you really going to do with a liberal arts degree? You can do a lot, for one. But one thing I loved that the White House did, their Twitter page, the White House Twitter page, every single Republican congressman and senator who badmouthed student loan, the student loan forgiveness, the White House came and listed the amount of money that each of them had their PPP loans forgiven.
Oh, yes, because that is an interesting thing to compare this to. It's funny because we talked about it in the episode too. It's like the narrative seems cool with forgiving bigger corporations, which can also cost the small business people. But we seem to really have this lazy narrative when it comes to giving help to individual humans. And I still kind of back something that we shared. If you support small business, if you want more small businesses, more women-owned, more Black-owned, really any minority-owned businesses, supporting student loan forgiveness is supporting those things. That's just, I never would have put that correlation together had it not been for the researching going on with our show like we did. But yeah, that being said, for anybody who doesn't know, Pell Grants were actually limited to students who needed financial help, like in that financial need category. So to me, it's almost kind of addressing this issue of we probably shouldn't have given them the loan, right? And I know some people aren't going to like that message. That doesn't sit right, that you can be told no to furthering your education. But that again goes into maybe we need to have the topic, the real discussion of, do we start working towards free college? Because that would also negate some of this, well, it's just going to happen again stuff. And it would also maybe help, hey, you know what? If there is nothing to do with a liberal arts degree, I'm not saying I agree with that sentiment, but if there's nothing to do with it, well, then that shouldn't be one of the degree plans that would be under free education. You realize you could totally put it as a free education depending upon what you're studying. Right. So there are ways to kind of think of this differently. That's not necessarily making, every theater person. I could see some argument for maybe not covering theater because it goes back to some of that societal good stuff, right?
But I would counter with this. One of the largest exports that America has are our movies. And where do you think, the actors and behind the scenes people come from? They come from Broadway and all that stuff. That's how they're able to find that stuff. So that's another thing that doesn't make sense because it is a moneymaker,
Yeah, I mean, it's a point to be made of if it doesn't seem to serve, hey, I'm okay with looking at it logically like that. If it's not a job that helps increase our GDP or helps make society a bit better, for example, working towards cures, I don't think that should be limited to people who can afford going to med school. You know what I mean? If they want to do that, I just don't think that should be limited and stop the person who could maybe cure cancer. But yeah, the funniest thing about this student loan conversation, though, is I want to let everybody know the Reverend Tracy follows God on Facebook, and he is fucking hilarious right now. All of the things that he's posting, like I love remember everybody, the story about snakes talking is literal, but debt forgiveness was strictly a metaphor. And it kind of goes to that the Christian versus the Exian, as I've said or called it, and I guess a growing number of people are starting to embrace that term Exian, because Christian was really more intended to portray that person over there is Christ-like. It wasn't necessarily something you were supposed to call yourself, at least in some of the OG terms of it. So yeah, when you're actively going against things that I'm pretty sure Big J would have totally approved of, I question if you're Christian or Exian. And this is one of those examples of, and there's even some with like feeding the needy, where, we don't want them to be reliant on us, so that's bad. And it's like Jesus didn't have any of that conversation when he was passing out fish and bread to folks.
Well, think of how insidious the GOP is as well. I mean, we both put up a tweet from Republican Representative Jim Banks, where he said student loan forgiveness undermines one of our military's greatest recruitment tools at a time of dangerously low enlistments. They're saying the quiet part out loud now, and like their defenders don't see the problem with this,
That's the problem with anchoring bias, right? Is sometimes you just stay so stuck to it that you don't understand that the thing that you just said out loud should have just been kept inside.
Yeah.
Like there was enough of their followers he thinks would agree with that, which that goes into, I mean, politicians don't really serve as much as they used to.
No.
Right? Like we had presidents before that fucking led like battles and shit. And that seemed to all but disappear, it seems. Like I can't really name a lot of our big political figures, especially presidents in the recent history, that have served in those ways that kind of traditionally presidents used to serve, like back in the day. But yeah, the conversation around student loan debt, we did our episode before that news came out. I know it aired after, but it's been really funny to kind of watch that.
Indeed. So what we did is we put a question out there to see if we had anybody out there in social media land willing to answer. And we had one person this week. And the question was, should we be doing more to ease the burden of predatory school loans so that average citizens can actually enjoy the benefits of the education they worked for? And someone AJ Sanchez, responded. He said, I took no loans for my education because I couldn't stand the prospect of graduating in debt. It sucked, but I'm glad I did it that way over getting stuck with debt. I know that not everyone can do it the way I did, but more people probably should. And he was able to go through school without having debt, so good on him for that.
Yes.
That a lot of people can't say that. The fact that he is that is a good thing here. And two, I think what his comment kind of shines a light on more than anything is the fact that this loan forgiveness is like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound, really. I mean, we're not fixing the underlying problem. We're essentially making it to where the problem becomes a bigger problem later. We're passing the buck here. Right.
And that's some of those interesting articles that you can find out there. Especially even some of the stuff that we talked about in the pro-con article even spoke of, well, I mean, this really could do better to go hand in hand with fixing the education system. Because if more and more jobs are going to require degrees, well, then that degree should maybe be included in public schooling options. And maybe like we don't need so many liberal arts majors. Like there could be, and I'm just, again, that's just because it was thrown out there and I love to devil's advocate a little bit. But, there could be some arguments to help shift people around. Like, yeah, it would be great if more people even did some of the blue collar jobs like trade schools and electrician work. And, somebody does need to have the technical skills to fill potholes. Because that is way more complicated. If you think that's a just throw some shit in it job, you're wrong. And that is part of the problem, and why nobody wants the job is because people look down on those folks when you don't understand the role. Meanwhile, it's very necessary. I almost wish there was actually more programs for free trade school. Can we start there?
You would think. I mean, it makes no sense that higher education can only really be obtained by people that take out massive loans or people that have the money in the first place. Because look at teachers. I mean, we're having a major shortage in this country of teachers, and we're also kind of making it harder for people to get an education to become a teacher to fill the spots that we're losing in the first place.
And not just teachers. My eyes scrolled by an article today, and I kind of clicked on it and just went through it really quick, where there are some schools that are starting to hire students for non-teaching jobs, like in the cafeteria, some of the janitorial work, etc., because they really want to focus on hiring more teachers. So they can't also need to focus on these other jobs that are now not being filled. My theory on that is due to intergenerational disrespect of those jobs. It makes people less likely to want to do it. I still remember people making fun of the janitor. You don't want to be a janitor. You don't want to be a burger flipper. You don't want to be a house cleaner. You don't want to be the person holding the sign for construction or the pothole filler. Like, we've had that for so long that no shit, nobody wants to do it, because we've basically ingrained it in our societal conversation that those aren't going to be respectable jobs, and they should be. So fuck it. Maybe we could even start there. Can we get our trade jobs up by somehow offering a benefit of those being covered by, like, whether it be a government thing or however you want to work it out?
Think about this too. I mean, what if a person that owned a successful carpentry place put a thing out there, like, hey, I will hire you and pay you like a low amount of money, but enough to go to school with. And then when you're done with the trade school, guess what? I got a new employee here. I mean, why aren't more companies investing in their employees to get it? But, like we talked about too, based on the size of the company, the bigger the company, the more likely they're going to view the person as just a number, always replaceable. And, Amazon, they're actually at a point right now to where certain places in the country, they're going to run out of people to hire based on how they treat their workers. And that is insane.
Yeah. So I guess basically what I kind of came to just in this little snippet of conversation is, if we have decided we need more blank, then maybe that's where we start with some of the education, either finding a way to make it free so that person does not have to incur loans. Like, because really some of the forgiveness stuff is just kind of wacky and out there, because you're still incurring a debt. It still affects you in ways, right? Because then your debt to income ratio is still fucked and can mess with your ability to get a house, certain jobs, etc. So it seems like the forgiveness that we've offered isn't good enough. So maybe if we identify jobs that are needed, there should be a way to make it so that person can get educated for that job and not have to pay either the credit hit price or the long-term loan price of doing that.
Indeed. And I'm sure this is a topic that we will revisit again at some point, because obviously the problem was not solved this past Wednesday. Not that anybody expected it to, but
this was a vote grab, to be totally blunt. Like, this is Biden administration trying to get votes. Like, there's even some early financial geniuses, people who actually work at Goldman Sachs, that have looked at this and be like, it's not going to cause the crazy inflation that this side says, and it's also not going to necessarily do all of the benefits, particularly ones that would influence the GDP, that this side is saying. So that's where it's like, okay, this is a vote grab. That's where I'm at on it right now. I like it, and I hope it goes through, because it would affect me in a way that would be very positive, but I'm still going to call a spade a spade. It's trying to get votes from a younger demographic that's not really as interested in voting right now.
And to your point, is it a vote grab? I would agree with that. To me, I have no problem with vote grabs that do benefit so many people, because this is not a situation where Biden's stating, for everybody that voted for me, you're getting a $2,000 check in the mail. Party it up. No, it's an investment in the future, because, again, someone going to college to become a doctor, they're not lazy. Even if they are going and graduate with a liberal arts degree, I'm sure there are people that graduate and then don't amount to anything. But again, school is a different thing. It is an investment. But
yes, dear government, if you want more jobs of certain quality, you need to figure out a way to get people in them in spite of what money they can give for it. That's where I'm at with it. So that's even up to you. You want great doctors? You do want good enough doctors? Well, that's going to depend on what you're going to be willing to spend as the government to invest in those jobs being able to be filled.
And who you vote for, most importantly these days. So
vote.
Yes, we are on to our main event this week, and it's all because we had an unintentional, interesting social experiment. As we opened the show, you heard the Reverend Tracy responding to this gentleman. And when we close the show, you'll hear my response to this gentleman. But tell the folks at home a little bit about the guy.
So I had actually commented on this second because Tim had sent me his response first. And I went, I want to have some fun with this because that's how the comedic mind works sometimes is, it's basically this dude who is a relationship coach, and he seems to have a very misogynistic tilt to his coaching. And that's just by going through a few videos. I didn't want to give him too many views, to be totally honest. But I did want to watch a few and just get an air for this person. It's kind of the same thing I did with Amber Heard. Like, I feel like if I'm going to be critical, I should make sure they're not joking. Mm-hmm. And I should make sure if this is really a message they kind of die on a hill for. Right?
You want to hear the context of it. You don't want to go just on the headline.
I like to try to understand the human. This guy seems a little bit jaded. And again, not my professional opinion, just my humble one. And the audio bite that you would have heard is him saying that masculine men do not care about a woman's opinion. And just in case you were curious, the part of my anatomy that slipped out was my middle finger. So yeah, that's what happened. I was just trying to be funny because I figured, in my head when I heard you don't care about a woman's opinion, but I bet you care about her anatomy, and wanted to have some fun with that. So I did that. And it's great. My comment on my original TikTok is still there from the wealth coach, crypto wealth coach, guys, that felt the need to come onto my page and say that somehow, because of my response, that I agreed or somehow validated the point of the poster. And then said that I was clearly triggered by it. So it was really funny. We went back and forth for a little bit. There were some comments that I had left that were just for him that I did inevitably delete, mostly because that's not my actual brand and how I deal with most people. And I don't want most people to think that that's how I deal with any criticism. This guy is being a dick, and I had no problem being a bit of a dick back. And when he replied, I deleted the two, and I had just left the one that said, and besides, calling out someone for being triggered, is kind of ignorant behavior. Because really, there's no need to say, you're triggered right now. Because really all you're going to do is trigger that person in a different way. And I felt like that was very much what he was trying to do on purpose. So yes, the Reverend decided to be a bit of a dicketh back to the dick on the page. And then I guess what's funny is Tim got no comments on yours, but comments on sharing mine again. And my only question was, did you also reshare the hashtags, or did you just share it as it was?
I did put some hashtags on there. I mean, the hashtags are important on social media so people can find your post. So I do try to put them on. But it wasn't the same exact hashtags that you did. But to your point, yeah, because I'd even put my video up on Instagram and got nothing, but putting your video up, immediately a guy, and I knew it was a guy, came up and was basically stating you and the other guy in the video were both being childish, which I don't see how. And secondly, he insinuated via the hashtags that he used that you were somehow playing a victim.
That part made me laugh a little bit. Even when you told me the first time, so I was like, wait, I'm playing a victim by making a joke about how about my anatomy. Okay. And I mean, actually, I'll totally own, sure, it was childish, but a lot of making comedy is a little bit childish. I was kind of making fun of this perception that masculine men should not care about a woman's opinion. And yeah, that was where I came out. It was a childish thing. So yes, I will actually agree that my response was childish, but that was kind of the point that I was making. It was kind of that court gesture. I'm pointing out the childishness of the person that I'm responding to by being childish in return. It's a very common comedy response.
And in this case, I think vital, because what is going to be gained by interacting with this guy on a respectful level? Why do you feel this way, sir? I mean, people that have such extreme views like that need to be mocked. They do. This guy is wrong for the attitudes that he has, and anybody that listens to him are setting up some women for some really, really depressing times.
Oh yeah, it's like, all right, well, kind of like how I said, stay single, stay toxic to the other one. It's like, okay, stay masculine. You do you, boo. But no, as far as like feeling like a victim, or that one's the other one. The whole victim mentality is another term that I feel is being used a lot to try to trigger the person they're talking to, because somehow if you trigger them more, you're right, I guess. I don't know, but it totally seems to be a tactic. Don't necessarily fall for it. I know I'm not going to. I didn't lose any sleep that somebody thought I was playing a victim, especially because it's kind of downgrading a real issue of victim mentality, which to my understanding of victim mentality is either playing a victim because you do believe that there's a societal good that you get from playing a victim, even though you might not necessarily believe that you are, or being forever identified with a victim that cannot move past what happened. And so those are the real definitions of that. So him saying that really just didn't mean shit to me. So
yeah, and I knew you would not be, weeping into a bowl of ice cream or clutching a teddy bear or something like that. But we did want to take some time to talk about misogyny this week because of this. It's one of those things, because this incident, kind of blew my mind when, in fact, it really shouldn't have. I've seen enough of what guys can do in the world that, I should not have been surprised at this reaction, but it did kind of just blow my mind. Like I said virtually the same thing you did. I was just as, I was probably more vulgar, in how I responded, but you got the flack. That was fucked up.
Oh, yeah. Well, and it's funny because even on the Amber Heard one, some dude rolled in there and said something like, I just deleted it because it was so dumb and irrelevant. It was like, maybe get a haircut before you start getting advice. And I'm like, I have short hair, so do you mean grow it out? Like, it just wasn't even worth responding to. It was just it made my brain go, okay, I get it. You're trying to dig on my physicality because you think I give a fuck what you, strange man, think about how I look physically. So it is kind of interesting that when I make comments on some of the kind of what I perceive as toxic attitudes, especially in our dating culture, that I do kind of get quote unquote attacked in that sense. Like it's virtually attacked, but it's still somebody trying to be an aggressor towards a message they did not like of mine. So that's why I will use the word attacked.
And yeah, I mean, it's because like the person that responded on Instagram, the person that responded on TikTok, we're not talking about like a hothead. There's a difference between a hothead and a troll. A hothead may say some things that you're going to disagree with, but at the end of the day, that you at least have a chance, not 100% chance, but at least a chance to be able to talk it out and have some form of civility there. But someone coming in with the fire right away, you're playing a victim. Fuck you.
Oh, yeah. And that's what was so prime about both of those and why, we try to talk about mental health where we can. And these are just those examples about sometimes people who have kind of abusive mentality towards other people will kind of give themselves permission to intentionally try to trigger somebody. So, I mean, my God, if you suspect somebody is triggered by a message out there, it's not necessarily the good thing to point out that you feel that they are triggered. Because to me, like I said, you're just trying to get an elicit worse response, because if you can manage to trigger them by calling them triggered, it means you're super right. I mean, granted, I don't think he thinks he's any less correct by my kind of refuting the whole triggered thing. And even a friend of the show came in and made some comments to this human. But I think it's funny because they didn't reply to John. They replied to me. Now, in one of them, they were clearly talking to John, but see that you need to reply to the right person. So instead, he made sure I saw the comment, not that person, because I'm new to TikTok and I know this. These people have sadly thousands of followers. So I know they know how to use it. So I also thought that was an interesting thing to note, was even though one of my male friends had responded and took my side on it, they still didn't reply to him. They replied to me.
Yeah. And wow. So
on that note, we're going to talk about misogyny today, folks.
Indeed. Now, you found an interesting article. It was an interview from Vox called What We Get Wrong About Misogyny. It was an interview that was done with a woman by the name of Kate Mann. She's a Cornell philosophy professor, and I didn't catch the name of the book that she wrote, but if I remember, we can put it in the show description as well.
Down Girl. I just clicked on the little link that was right there since it was easy. Down Girl, The Logic of Misogyny.
Got it. Now, you're the one who found the article. What were some of the points that you that struck you when you read it?
So really, I wanted to share this because we do kind of seem to be starting to interchange and melting pot the term misogyny and sexism. And what I wanted to read from this is at least just the first part, because I thought they did a really good job showing that these two terms are different, but they are kind of related, and in a way they help the other one to exist. Like it's almost like a, what's it called when it's like a mutually beneficial, like a symbiotic relationship or whatever. Yeah. Like it's kind of a parasite to the other, but they help each other to persist. So I did want to share a little bit of this one. But basically it starts off, I liked a little bit of the top part of what is misogyny, how is it different from sexism, and why does the male-dominated status quo seem to persist? A book by Cornell philosophy professor Kate Mann has answers. She argues that misogyny is not about male hostility or hatred towards women. Instead, it's about controlling and punishing women who challenge male dominance. Misogyny rewards women who reinforce the status quo and punishes those who don't. In this interview, that I'll totally go through just the top part of it, they explored how sexism and misogyny are different, how misogyny is embedded in our customs and institutions, and what Trump's election and our current moment reveal about our future. And so just to put into context, I believe this was actually written more like in the 2016, like the year that Hillary Clinton lost. And then there was also, this was brought up again when Elizabeth Warren dropped. From the race. So this article was bringing up an old interview that happened right after I think Trump had won against Hillary Clinton. And so they did note that the conversation is lightly edited for clarity. So Tim, since Sean is the interviewer and Kate is the respondent, would you like to read Sean's part to help make this clear to our listeners?
Sure. Okay.
Your best acting voice. Go.
Can you sum up your argument in this book?
There's a tendency to define misogyny as this deep hatred in the heart, harbored by men towards girls and women. I define misogyny as social systems or environments where women face hostility and hatred because they're women in a man's world, a historical patriarchy.
I always thought of misogyny as an ideology, a body of ideas that exists to justify social relations. But you argue that this is sexism and that misogyny is better understood as a moral manifestation of sexist ideology.
Yes, that's really well put. One way of looking at it is we have these patriarchal social structures, bastions of male privilege where a dominant man might feel entitled to and often receive feminine care and attention from women. I think of misogyny as I think of misogyny and sexism as working hand in hand to uphold those social relationships. Sexism is an ideology that says these arrangements just make sense. Women are just more caring or nurturing or empathetic, which is only true if you prime people by getting them to identify with their gender. So sexism is the ideology that supports patriarchal social relations, but misogyny enforces it when there's a threat of that system going away. Quote, "It hurts to know that the most incompetent, morally bankrupt, and ignorant white man can be elected."
Truer words have never been spoken. That's from me. And to finish us off, misogyny, the way you define it, is something we practice almost unconsciously. We're embedded in a culture, and we internalize the customs and social mores that define that culture and thus perpetuate it. We're all implicated, even if we're not aware of it. And when you were reading your part, what I thought of was women in the military and how that attitude has changed over the years, and how women have had to fight for that because, I think of, when I was younger, I didn't, especially when, Bush came along and we started having wars every other month, for a while, I was against the idea of women in combat, for all of the reasons everybody knows, until I took the time to think about it. And I thought about the fact that if I know this, maybe the women know this too and are willing to take those, willing to take the chance of negative things that could potentially happen to a woman in combat. It was dismissive and wrong for me to think that way, but I was trained as a kid that women shouldn't be in combat. It's not a woman's job to be, on the front lines. Women are great at nursing, but holding a gun, not so much.
Yeah, it's interesting. I really liked some of this back and forth here because it kind of goes into some of the programming that we've talked about, like even in our TV shows, right? And I really enjoyed the part where she talked about, these arrangements just make sense. Women are just more caring or nurturing or empathetic, but that's only true if you prime people to identify that with their gender, right? We have plenty of men who are very nurturing and awesome at that. And we have some women that just, that's not their thing. So it kind of goes back to, I know, a conversation I've had with my feeling of I'm non-binary, I associate as non-binary. And I think a lot of that for me came from those messages of what people said I should do, want to do, love, that I just didn't. Mm-hmm. So of course I didn't feel like a feminine person or a girl, because basically everybody told me that I should love this shit that I just didn't. So it's somewhere in my mind, personally, I took that as like, oh, okay, well, I'm not a girl then. So, and I'm not saying that's everybody who's non-binary or gender fluid, or even like complete, a female-bodied human who prefers he, him pronouns and associates as a male. Like, I'm not saying that's always the driving force for that. Just for me personally, when I unpack why I feel how I feel about myself today, very much has to do with that. And that was from stuff in the TV, from stuff people told me, like, to my face. So it's interesting to see it put in a way that's very understandable. That's like, yes, those are only true if you buy into that greater narrative. And it goes back to, we do see it. We see it a lot. We're exposed to it constantly in social programming, which is our TV shows, our Netflix, our Hulu shows, things like that. I mean, I know that's why I'm very particular about what I watch on TV.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, you can easily find yourself becoming a different person if you, pay attention to only negative stuff. But I thought I thought the interview here was good because, yeah, it didn't reinforce kind of some of the negative connotations that, I mean, when people tend to like throw around the term misogynist a lot. And it seems like they use that more as a deflection than an honest sort of assessment sometimes, depending on the issue. But it seems like more often than not, we're not having these conversations about what it really means in order to potentially fix the issue.
Right, exactly. And I think it's almost like how everybody's a narcissist now. It's kind of it's a little bit of a hyperbole that's kind of starting to infiltrate. But there is a difference between somebody who is a narcissist, which I would say implies that they have NPD, or narcissistic personality disorder, which is incredibly rare. And some people actually are questioning if that should be a standalone diagnosis, since it coexists with so many things that actually might just be a symptom. Like high narcissism is a symptom for other things. And might not necessarily be a standalone diagnosis. That's something that's kind of going on in the background of kind of the psychology world right now. And I haven't read too much on it, especially not recently. That was something that was a little bit more, someone called me a narcissist like well over a few years ago. And part of my own personal way of processing when I get called anything is to shadow work. Don't immediately assume they're projecting their shit onto me. I do try to question it. So I did want to look into that. And that's where I kind of stumbled across some of the back and forth of whether or not this should even be a standalone diagnosis. But I think we're kind of doing the same thing with misogyny right now, is we're using it as a term to label somebody as a bad person. Right? Like you're a misogynist, but really it kind of seems like much with narcissism, there's a lot of it that's being encouraged in the social programming, in our TV. I know I'm going to read because I'd like to intro the tips that we found on this, because I think there was a part of the paragraph that kind of points out that there's a lot of interesting ways that we support this in our culture. And if we truly want misogyny and that hand-in-hand relationship that it has with sexism to be diminished, that there's some things we need to consider. And a lot of that is what we're watching on TV, or at least questioning those things.
And that is a great segue here. For folks that are interested, we will have the link to the Vox interview in our show description. We'll also put it on our group page. We encourage you to read this. This is a good one here, but dive into the 6 tips article here.
Yeah, so this is 6 tips for reducing and preventing misogyny and sexual harassment amongst teens and young adults. And this comes through from Harvard. Now, I do want to say it was last reviewed in 2018, but I don't think much of the information has really changed. Yeah. Now, I know this is meant for teens and young adults, so this is a little bit geared towards parenting, but I wanted to challenge people out there, because in the whole shadow work, shadow integration world, there's this concept called reparenting your inner child. So even though you don't have kids that you can apply this to, I open you up to the idea that you're allowed to reparent yourself at any point. This is some of those checks that you can do to make sure you're not feeding into this.
Indeed. So we're going to go back and forth here. How do we want to do this?
Yeah, I'll take point 1, since I just kind of introduced it, and I want to do the first paragraph anyway, and then I figure we can trade off that way. So just to go into that first paragraph. Misogyny and sexual harassment are distressingly commonplace in young people's lives, in music lyrics, popular television shows, video games, magazines, and movies. Words like bitch and hoe are thrown around casually in school hallways, and a bros before hoes culture pervades many college campuses still, and many teens and young people still label girls as either good or bad and slut shame those they consider bad. And they did a recent national survey. Again, this was back in 2018. It was last reviewed, but it said 87% of 18 to 25-year-olds reported that at some point in their lives, they had been victims of some form of sexual harassment. So this is really just kind of prefacing why this is worth challenging, right? Because it is a little bit of everywhere. Again, I know I've gone on the spiel before that I'm very careful what music I listen to, because the lyrics very much matter, because it does speak to a part of your brain subconsciously. So the first tip they had was clearly define sexual harassment and degradation. Why? Many teens and young people don't know the range of behaviors that constitute misogyny and sexual harassment. We as parents need to explain what these violations mean and provide specific, concrete examples. And something that there's 2 little points that they had brought up to try. And again, I invite you to question in yourself. Do you actually know what sexual harassment and degradation means to you? Like, have you ever honestly thought about that as an adult? So the points were: make a point of talking to your teen or young adult about what specifically constitutes sexual harassment and degradation. Make it clear that you take the conversation seriously and that you are open to questions. You might start by asking them both to define these terms and to give you examples of each of these violations. You might then need to clarify any misunderstandings and provide common examples of harassment and misogyny, such as referring to someone as a bitch or a hoe. I really love that those are in quotes and it makes me giggle. Or things like catcalling, whistling, or commenting on someone's clothes or appearance when those comments might be unwanted. Ask young people to carefully consider what it might be like to subject to comments like these. Make it clear that girls and boys can harass, and that even if the words or behaviors you are discussing are intended as a joke, they risk scaring and offending others. In fact, 62% of female respondents to our survey of 18 to 25-year-olds reported that they would be, quote, offended, scared, or angry in response to being catcalled. And the other tip they had is check in with your teen or young adult periodically to see if they've remembered and absorbed this information. And yeah, check in with yourself, man. Like, because slipping happens. If you're not looking at a behavior, especially if you've been passively trained to accept these mentalities since childhood, it is important to revisit it from time to time.
Yeah, and it's examine yourself too. I mean, because a lot of behaviors are committed by people that don't think that their behaviors are necessarily bad. And, even if they get it pointed out to them, a lot of times it's just a joke. It's just offering a compliment and all that stuff, when in fact, no, you're part of the problem, and I think people do need to be open to that. Like, remember a couple weeks back, you sent me a picture that you had taken of yourself of 2017, and I recalled a little history behind that. There was, because you had taken a previous picture at that same point, the first picture you took, you were not smiling. And I mentioned, oh, you looked upset and all that. And then you ended up taking another photo of you smiling. And this is the first time you dyed your hair, of course. And yep. Innocuous question, and I think you understood that I wasn't being, malicious or anything like that. But on the flip side too, a lot of women do hear this. I didn't take the time to think about my comment and how it could be perceived, and so I was definitely wrong for approaching like I did, but you have to be able to look into yourself and be able to say, hey, maybe I'm part of the problem too,
Oh yeah. And in a weird way, me responding by basically giving you what you, quote, asked for but didn't actually ask for is I did turn around and take another picture. And it was really funny. I didn't even remember that until you had told me that you had thought about it after the fact and decided that what you said was like kind of messed up. And I had never really interpreted it that way, just because I know I'm terrible about smiling in photos. But no, I mean, that also goes to show like that's how shadow work can work. Like Tim did it all on his own. He kind of realized, like, and he saw this memory and remembered, oh my God, I felt like such a whatever, like, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but, that I said that. I basically said, you should smile, which we know that that's something that you don't say. It's something that statistically gets said from men to women, and that has now been a little bit more recognized that that's not really acceptable. To tell somebody what they should be doing with their facial expressions because you want them to look more pleasant is not your place.
Indeed. Let's dive in to number 2 here. And it starts off with step in and stick with it. Why? If you're the parent of a teen or young adult, chances are you'll encounter a sexist or sexually degrading comment from them or their friends or peers. Yet too many parents stay silent when this happens. Sometimes we freeze. We simply don't know what to say. Parents who do intervene often think that their intervention won't matter or change young people's behavior. It's true that even if we intervene, offensive comments may not stop. There are powerful forces that have driven males throughout history and across cultures to degrade females. But passivity not only condones these comments, it can also diminish young people's respect for us as adults and role models. Further, even if teens can't absorb or act on our words in the moment, they often still register our words and internalize them as they mature. And it makes sense. You want to practice what you preach, and it takes constant reminding. And I think, too, especially when it comes to guys, it is important, especially for a father figure, to stand up and defend, too, because of how easy locker room talk can become regular talk.
Yeah, and I guess like the way that I could see this sort of applying to adults who aren't raising children is this is also something we do when friends make comments, right? Like we feel like we aren't allowed to issue social correction, which granted, yeah, that's not super encouraged, but I would say that this is a topic that if you feel it's important enough, maybe you can find a way to address behaviors with your friends. I mean, there's got to be something better than just being, I don't want to be friends with you anymore. Maybe let the intelligent conversation be what ends a friendship in that situation instead of staying silent or just walking away from their toxic behaviors and not even giving them a chance to respond to the idea that, you know, this could be offensive, what you just said to people. You and I had kind of a funny moment. It was about food, though, like vegan food, because I had gotten a plant milk maker. And Tim, and again, I know Tim wasn't trying to hurt me or say anything to be mean, but he had said, yay, fake milk. And I had just put it out there, and I'm so glad that Tim and I have that friendship that I can say this, like, hey, just a hot tip. People don't like their food being called fake. Like, and again, I totally know Tim's heart was not to, you know, invalidate my plant milk, but still being able to find friendships where you can have those conversations so that Tim doesn't accidentally offend somebody else when I know he's not meaning to be offensive is still a nice way of handling things, right? Like, can we agree that maybe you should have friends that you can have conversations with and it not mean that you're not just going to talk anymore? And maybe if that does spur you not talking anymore, that's fucking fine.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to be like some residents in Portland here, you know, in terms of essentially being a virtue signaling type of person. You know, you shouldn't do that. That's so
right. But there's a difference between the virtue signaling and trying to have like emotionally intelligent conversations around things. Like if you have that instinct to shame somebody over something they said, and this could even go down to your teens, for those that are parents out there, maybe question that, because shame narrative doesn't always work. It tends to get people more like heel dug into any anchoring bias that they already have. So maybe trying to learn how to communicate better in those situations could be helpful.
All right. What is number 3?
Number 3, teach your child or yourself to be critical consumers of media and culture. Why? Many young people are raised on a steady diet of misogyny and sexual degradation in popular culture, but have never critically examined the media they consume or the cultural dynamics that shape their lives. You may be with your teen or young adult in a car and hear sexually degrading song lyrics, or be together when you learn about an episode of sexual harassment or degradation in the news. In these situations, it is vital that we as parents speak up and help our children become mindful, critical consumers of this information. Even if speaking up makes us uncomfortable, here again, silence suggests support. And I think it's really clear how this can be brought over, like to adult land, right? That parenting the inner child. I know a lot of people who aren't really that conscious of what they listen to. For me, especially if you do have anything like anxiety or depression, etc., I don't generally think it's a good idea to listen to mainstream radio playing whatever it feels like playing that minute, because of some of the messages and even some that can help make depression worse if you're not aware of what you're listening to. So I think the same thing totally stands to reason that if you're listening to songs that, you know, talk about degrade and hoes, that maybe that's going to make it more acceptable in a part of your brain. So being careful, and I'm not saying don't listen to your favorite jam every now and then. It's more of the constant passive listening that they've done studies on that can affect how you think and process in your world.
What I tried to do with my kids growing up when I talked about stuff like, you know, like PG-13 rated R type material that did have some stuff like this, you know, I kind of compare that type of art to like alcohol. You know, and like in moderate doses, alcohol, you know, for some people it is, you know, going to be fine. It has no long-term health disadvantages. And I'm not talking about people with like addictive personalities and stuff like that, just the average person. But, you know, anything that you overindulge in, you know, anything could be anything that is good could still be bad if you overindulge in it. And yeah, if all of your entertainment is, as a guy, is talking about how women are this and women are that, you know, I mean, Kid Rock was a thing for a reason.
Oh gosh, I got to saw that charming person live once. That happened. It was at like a company party I wound up at, and it was just like fucking Kid Rock, really?
I saw him in concert in 2000. You can blame weed for that, but that's a different story.
I at least got charmed by free food and having a fancy night of dress up with my partner at the time.
Yeah, me, it was smoking weed in the Van Andel Arena that I brought into the place in my sock.
I just think it's funny because both times I went to that particular company party, like I had no idea who the entertainers were. And I didn't learn that they would be there until we were there. And I was like, oh, I know some of these lyrics.
All right. Number 4 now?
Yeah, number 4.
4. Talk to your child about what they should do if they're sexually harassed or degraded. Many teens and young adults don't know what to do if they're harassed or degraded with gender-based slurs, whether it's being called a slut or bitch jokingly by a friend or being harassed by someone they don't know. It's vital for us as parents to help our children develop strategies for protecting themselves and reducing the chances of the offender harming others. And I love how they do have that dichotomy there of, the relationship with your friends and relationship with other people, because, I've had friends, hey, asshole, how you doing? And just weird stuff like that. And I've heard women, respond to other female friends, hey, you slut, and stuff like that. And maybe there's a part of reclaiming words there and stuff like that. But I did love the fact that they did kind of talk about both, because again, locker room talk is a thing. When you have a close group of people, sometimes they will think it's okay. They will talk about stuff. They will be comfortable talking about stuff they may not talk with other people. It doesn't make it bad or anything like that. But the problem comes when you think that locker room talk can be used with everybody.
Right. And I think I'm with you. I like that it wants to address both sides of that conversation. Of it's not just when men say certain things to women. It's like, no. This is actually being fed into in a lot of directions. And I actually do have an example of using it to reclaim it. Because a friend and I at the Christian university I went to, so this is after I got like scarlet red lettered, and like there was a no joke, somebody warning freshman classes to not be friends with me because I was like a vixen or a hussy or whatever. And I was totally like labeled as the temptress. Like it was really crazy shit. And this one person became friends with me after the fact. And so we totally would call to each other across the campus. And I would say, hussy, and she would go, slut. But it was really more of making fun of the fact that people had already labeled me as that. So that was like, not that I necessarily had the awareness to think of it that way while I was doing it, but it's some of those things that I try to unpack as I get older. It's like, okay, well, at least there I kind of get where I did that, right? Yeah. But really, I think this is something that could definitely be asked to the self, right? Like, what should you do if you're being harassed? Turns out just being silent, aka picking your battles, is not necessarily the thing we should be doing if we truly want this to end. And it even takes me to any conversation about body autonomy. One example was I was actually talking to my oldest stepchild about a situation that I remember playing out with their younger brother. Like I looked at the back seat and he was just smacking them on the leg like over and over. And I addressed it and made it stop. Uh-huh. But as we talked about this, now this is now a few years, they're a little bit older and there's been time since this, but they still remember that the whole reason they just sat there and dealt with it was because they needed to, quote, pick their battles. And now this is something that I will probably find a way, because I've got a relationship with my stepkids that we can talk about real stuff. And I do plan on talking about that when I see them next. Like, hey, I'm hoping this mentality got a little grown out of, but if somebody is violating your physical space, that they shouldn't, right? Like that's never okay. I don't care who's doing it. I don't care if it's your kid brother. I don't care if it's anybody. I don't think it's a good thing to teach, especially the narrative is that it goes towards girls to, quote, pick your battles in these situations, because that is something I hardcore remember being ingrained. And so it's super, in a way, triggered me. Call back to the top of the episode. When I heard my oldest stepchild kind of say that they've gotten this same message. So it's got to be coming from somewhere.
Yeah, and ultimately, yeah, I mean, you want to teach them too about an appropriate way of dealing with it, because you don't want them coming at somebody with like a 2x4 after. And I know that's an extreme example, but you want to be able to teach them to have the confidence to stick up for themselves in the right way, the right appropriate way as well.
Right.
Not encouraging violence unless it really is truly a situation to where they can't resolve it without it.
And that's, I think, almost falls under self-defense. Like, I do believe we should teach self-defense, but you don't necessarily meet all violence with violence, which I know can sound confusing, but it's kind of in the situation that I just talked about playing out. Like, if my oldest had turned around and like punched the youngest, that would have been a different conversation involving both of them. Meanwhile, I was able to talk, Dad and I both talked to the youngest about like, it's not okay to sit there and hit somebody. Like, and of course, at that age, you can kind of start prefacing how would you feel if it was done to you? If somebody was just hitting you and you didn't want that? Like, uncool.
And that is a great segue into number 5.
Exactly. Encourage and expect upstanding. Why? As ethical parents, we should expect our teens and young adults to not only protect themselves when they're harassed and degraded, but also to protect others, because they understand peer dynamics, are more likely to witness harassing behaviors, and often have more weight than adults in intervening with peers. Young people themselves are often in the best position to prevent and stop sexual harassment and misogyny among their peers. Learning to be an upstander is also a vital part of becoming an ethical, courageous person. Yet upstanding can be risky. Perpetrators can turn on upstanders. That's why it's important to brainstorm strategies with young people for actions that protect both them and the victim. And I go right back into train yourself to be more upstanding. And if that looks like having awkward conversations with friends, it looks like having awkward conversations with friends. I still stand by, if that's what's going to be what kills your friendship, maybe that's okay, because that could still have a lasting effect on them later should they ever decide to unpack why that friendship ended, right? Like, they're allowed to do that if they ever get curious about it, but at least you were clear as to why you ended that friendship. It's because you didn't want those values constantly in your tribe and your radar.
And think about it like this too. I mean, would you sit back and let a friend of yours constantly talk about like racist stuff? No, you would speak up. When it comes to like sexism, misogyny, and stuff like that, it is weird that you will have less people speak up about stuff like that when it is insidious as racism. It's something that should be called out.
Right. And I think I almost want to clarify, I know we've talked about like joking and jokes before. It's up to you to know your friend. I do think there's a difference between making a joke as a social commentary of, oh my God, people actually believe this, and permissing language of somebody who's like, well, X person shouldn't get X job because they are X, is like an example of what I would say is actually more of a racist or even a sexist statement, right? Like, versus making a joke about the fact that people believe those things is different. So I'm not saying under the same thing of pick your battles, but kind of try to know your friend a little bit, because you can accidentally be that social warrior that is torturing through friendships when really they feel the same way you do. So should you really be kicking friends to the curb who have a different way of processing negative information? Because deflection with humor is super common in trying to process stuff that you don't agree with. So sometimes the joke is somebody agreeing with your stance. It's not necessarily making it permissible, especially when they are clearly making fun of the attitude of the perpetrator in the situation.
Yeah, and it's understanding intent. I mean, we've talked about that with jokes before too. I mean, it's the intent of the joke that ultimately really matters. If it's punching up or punching down, then the words of the joke, because some of the funniest jokes are about some really violent. I mean, the producers, the Mel Brooks film Springtime for Hitler. Anybody? I mean, he's making a joke about Hitler and the Holocaust, and yet it worked. It was funny
because it's also very clear that he was making fun of Hitler, right? Like I don't even need to go to Springtime for Hitler.
That I remember the first time watching that, and the movie was just building up to that joke, but once that hit, I just couldn't stop laughing. But anyway, let's
Absolutely love it.
Yeah, indeed. Let's dive into number 6 here, and that is work to assure that young people have multiple sources of recognition and self-worth. Why? Because young people can be especially vulnerable to degradation and harassment if they're highly dependent on romantic and sexual attention and on peer approval. Many young people are also vulnerable because they have lower social status or are marginalized among their peers. LGBTQIA youth may be especially vulnerable in this respect. And yeah, I mean, I can definitely see that. I've gone to school. I remember high school, there were women that had reputations of being easy and, finding out after the fact that they were just nervous. They were shy. They were trying to fit in. And the one thing that they knew that they could use to fit in was their bodies,
Oh, yes. That kind of even like a hypersexualism that can happen because sometimes women, female-bodied people particularly, tend to think that there is value in what they can give from their loins. And so therefore being sexually desired means really good things about you, right? Because it even goes down to not even pointing it out to sex, but like not having boyfriends in school, like meant you were kind of a loser. So much that it's common practice for some of the more lower end of that social tier in schools to make up boyfriends in other towns. Like that's something that's more from the girl playbook than it was from the boy playbook. Granted, sometimes boyfriends from other towns are made up for other reasons, like you're covering up something. I know that was actually my case. I don't think it's been any secret. I think I've talked on here before that I had kind of an inappropriate older relationship when I was in school at one point. And I totally made up a boyfriend from another town. And what's great is they put together that I made up the boyfriend from the other town, but they never put together that it was hiding something else. Which was a very, very sad story. But that's not really the most of the reason that happens, right? Like normally it is because you're trying to look desirable, because even being desirable by somebody who's not there is better than being considered undesirable altogether.
Yeah, and I think too, like kind of in a way, this is kind of like what we were talking about with the toxic dating culture too, in terms of getting that recognition. And, as a parent, I think ultimately you do want to put them in spots to where they will be able to get recognition from other spots than just their schoolmates. Like let them go out of the house to join a club, let them join a sports, a sports league or something like that, or just find other ways for them to get that to where they don't have to get it in ways that will hurt them.
Right. Like I know we kind of weren't doing the try this for all of them. Of course, we'll include this article so you could see some of the try this bullet points that are a little bit more geared for parents towards their kids. But this one had a good one I wanted to mention. Encourage and support your teen or young adult or yourself in engaging in activities that build their confidence that don't involve romantic or sexual attention or approval from peers. These activities might involve, for example, the arts, sports, or service to others. And this even also goes hand in hand with some of the toxic dating stuff. Like my number one piece of advice to people who are single and would like to not be single is still prepare yourself for being an individual. Go out and enjoy hobbies that you like. I mean, in Portland, Oregon, there's freaking dragon boat rowing that you can get into, and you're going to meet people, right? Find things that you're interested, do them. I know like the Mr. Reverend and I are still on this mission of figuring out how to make friends as adults here in Maine. And so we've even talked about, there's outdoor groups. There's the ability to join the local rock gym which is something we did recently because we put together but if we join, we can just go 30 minutes a day. And even if we're only doing a few routes or doinking around on the gym equipment, we will more than get our money's worth, and we're staying active through the winter months, which is something that can be hard here. And since it's walkable, we should be able to get to it. Hell, I would get snowshoes, but we have cross-country skis too, which is another thing you can get into. I think this as an adult application, it encourages don't put all of your social interaction into dating apps, possibly, because I could see where for men and women that would kind of tie you to those sexual attention involving romance for approval. Whereas if you go and get involved in other groups of just stuff that you are interested in, it builds confidence, it builds a sangha or a community for yourself, and you can make friends, and it gives you those sense of value that's not related to stuff you can do with your pants off.
Yeah, and you also don't want to get into a spot where, I've been experiencing lately to where when you find some real gems, it can be demoralizing in a way to where, like, yeah, maybe I don't want to go out if I have to meet people like this.
I totally understand.
But that, I think, will bring us to the end of the episode here. We have officially solved misogyny, so thank you. No, I'm kidding.
No, we just wanted to talk about it. We don't always get comments in our TikToks that encourage it. It was an accidental social experiment that I guess we did unknowing to us. So it was just worth it to bring it up, because apparently it's really just that common in our culture that if you don't think that you're involved in it, it might be worth just taking that second of honest self-reflection to make sure you're not actually helping it along. And I think these articles and even the little tips thing that we found, I think it did a really good job of kind of pointing out some of those things that seem innocent enough, but that might be helping to perpetuate the misogyny and the sexism that goes hand in hand with it.
And for the guys out there too, like, work on yourselves, but also be supportive of the females in your life, because they do go through quite a lot. And yes. Just being able to see this was, on the one hand, a little disheartening, but on the other hand, I love that we have this outlet here to kind of sort it out and hopefully, make some chicken salad out of chicken shit here.
Right. I did want to throw it out there that, ladies, if a man steps in and tries to offer that advocate, that upstanding behavior to you, something that I have seen, it is not the number one response, but it is a response, and it is slightly prevalent, is kind of this kind of hyper feminist of, don't you dare fight my battles. I could have done that to my friend John, for example, for stepping in and commenting. Do I need John to fight my battles? By all means, no. But do we need more upstanders to show that this is not acceptable? Yes. So with that one, I would maybe question before you neg somebody for trying to step in this situation, because it's really not that they're trying to say that you're weak. They're just trying to help point out to this person that this attitude is very flawed. So it's really about the perpetrator, not you as the person who is experiencing the sexism or misogyny in the point. So just something to consider, right? And you can totally vet that as it goes. Like, you could very well get the sense that, oh, this dude thinks he's going to be my knight in shining armor and it's all about him. But I don't know. I would invite you to give the benefit of the doubt that they're just trying to help fight the social narrative that seems to feed into this in our culture by saying, this isn't cool, and I'm going to tell you from my perspective it is not cool what I just watched you do to this person. Indeed. Now, before we wrap up here, tell folks about Fearlandia one more time. Fearlandia one more time. We are still accepting applications. If you have never haunted with us before, yes, we will probably require some form of interview or audition, which we will be setting up through September with my awesome minions on the ground, my partners in crime. They're not below me just because I call them my minions. I don't view it that way anyway. They're very awesome people on our team. And I know that they're probably looking for build help. They're almost always looking for build help while they try to create these magnificent scenes like they do every year. So please feel free to apply. I did add a referral blank, so you can actually say Friends Talking Nerdy or FTN for short if you prefer, and then I'll know that you heard about us from here. I'm not going to promise any preferential treatment. I just would be curious how you heard about us. Well, we can also make you podcast famous. How about that? Oh my God, podcast famous. I actually talked about that at the Rock Gym the other day because they made a whole joke about, your autograph and I'll keep it in case you get famous. Like, well, I do have a podcast. Hey, whatever works, right? Yeah, whatever gets me a discount at places. Yeah. Maybe. It didn't work. It didn't get me anything. I'm just kidding.
Well, speaking of the podcast, should I go with my announcement about what I will be doing at the end of October?
Go for it. Yeah, that's up to you. That's your news to share. Go.
Yeah. Well, I am making a life change here. Portland, Oregon has been wonderful to me in a lot of ways, but I've also had quite a number of impactful events that have occurred within a short period of time that make it seem like the best thing for me to do is move, and it kind of coincides with, I've been open about my battles with depression and, just where I'm at with my life. And like, I think one thing, being 45, let's be honest here, like I have, more days behind me than more days ahead of me, most likely, and I think what I want to do at this point in my life is work on building myself up. And one thing that I think that will help with that is being able to work some more on this show. And because I think for what we do with the show here, we are the equivalent of like a band that has a gig every Saturday at the local bar at the end of the road, and if that's all we are ever destined to be, we are still riding high. We're still a success, but I think we can also be much more. So at the end of October, I am moving to Maine.
Yay! So yes, the Reverend Tracy and Tim the Nerd are going to cohabitate in a house. We have a spare room here that is woefully empty for majority of the year. So, and it's really funny because I've mentioned I have moved from state to state, and literally every time, I swear this is like part of my dharma or something like that, is I help people relocate. Because every single time somebody has come and moved where I moved to and roomed with me, at least for a little bit of that transition. Granted, it's mostly gone very well. There's been very few situations, like only one situation that kind of ended super awkwardly, but it wasn't that crazy at the end of it. And both of us have kind of moved on from that. But yeah, I'm excited that Tim's coming. He gets to learn some of the weird world of the Reverend. Spoiler alert, we don't have traditional couches or a kitchen table because those are just decisions that the Mr. Reverend and I made at one point. But we're very excited about it on this side of the country.
I'm excited as well because, when you first came back to the show was the height of the pandemic. And when you were living in Portland, with your health issues and with the pandemic, we were not going to be doing, shows, together in the same room or anything like that. And then by the time the pandemic kind of laid off a little bit to the point where we could do that, you moved.
I know. I'm such a stinker, but that'll be interesting. You'll get to come over to the other Portland and see, the density of humans here is just not as dense as the other Portland. So the mask wearing is very come and go still. Like, we're not super doing it anymore. Mm-hmm. And it seems to be working out for us. So, and also, there is a plethora of history here, which is exciting news for you guys because that means we can actually do more on-site stuff.
Indeed.
Like, Tim and I can totally go spend a day at Cape Elizabeth and talk about the shipwreck that happened there, poetry that was inspired by the location, and even some of the war stuff, because a lot of that shit happened over here, right? A lot of the beginnings of the United States of America started here. And it's awesome. Tim is moving to the Portland that Portland, Oregon was named after via a coin flip, which is something fun I've gotten to share as trivia to many people here. They didn't know that. That Portland, Oregon was between being named after Portland, Maine or Boston, Massachusetts, and it came down to a coin flip, and naming it after Portland, Maine won.
Like I said, I'm excited. And I think with us living in the same town, I think we're going to be able to do so much more with the show. We're, I've already taken out a $200,000 loan. We're getting a front page ad on the New York Times. No kidding.
Nice. Yes, let's do that. Let's put it on the Maina News. Oh, get used to puns because everything's named after puns here. Everything is like mainly furniture. My favorite is mainly nudes, which is a noodle shop. So enjoy that.
Yeah, I didn't expect to get this here. Anyway.
Just lobster rolls.
Yeah, I know, but I am excited because, like, I think we're going to be able to do a lot in order to build the show up. And again, I think we can build it into something bigger than what it currently is. You know, we can be a band that, you know, has a gig at the corner bar every Saturday, but can also do other things as well. And who knows how big we could potentially get, but, you know, we're not going to know until we do it, you know. And I think just like a band, you know, I think people in our spot can make smart investments. And it doesn't have to be anything lavish or anything like that can help build a community. And I'm partly scared, but really, really excited about the future.
Yes, I think it'll be a good time.
Indeed. So thank you all for listening to another episode of Friends Talking Nerdy. Each Saturday, we will have something in this podcast space to entertain your ear holes. Until we meet again, we bid you adieu.
Stay masculine.
Bye.
Masculine men do not care about a woman's opinion.
The only time this idiot has ever had any sort of interaction with women is when he had to pay $3.99 a minute to do so. So, shave and go fuck yourself.
Subscribe to Friends Talking Nerdy on iTunes, the Google Play Music Store, as well as Spotify. Remember to support Friends Talking Nerdy on Patreon. Goodbye, darling.